My name is Lowell, and for most of my life, I believed in the kind of love that could withstand anything. I thought my marriage was built on trust, on a deep, unshakable connection. But I was wrong. So very wrong. I remember the night I discovered the truth. It wasn't some explosive moment, no screaming or accusations thrown across the room. No, it was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that weighs on your chest, making it hard to breathe. I was sitting at our kitchen table, scrolling mindlessly through my phone when a message popped up on the screen. It wasn't even meant for me. A name I didn't recognize. A string of words I wished I'd never read. I miss you already. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a spam message. But as I kept reading, the pit in my stomach deepened. The texts were too personal, too familiar. They spoke of stolen moments, whispered confessions. And then there it was, the confirmation. A picture. Her. My wife. The woman I had spent years loving, trusting, building a future with. I could have confronted her right then and there. I could have demanded an explanation, forced her to stumble over lies she hadn't prepared. But something inside me just shut down. The love I had for her, the trust, the certainty. It all shattered in an instant. I put my phone down, stared at the wall. My heart wasn't even racing. It was as if my body had already accepted what my mind refused to process. And that's when I made the decision. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even pack much, just enough to leave and never look back. That night, while she was asleep, I grabbed a bag, my wallet, my keys. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a moment, watching her breathe. She looked peaceful. How ironic. I turned and walked out. No note, no message, just silence. For a year, I disappeared. Not in a dramatic way, no fake identity, no moving across the world. I just chose to exist differently. I found a small town where no one knew my name, got a quiet job that didn't ask too many questions. I kept to myself. It was peaceful in a way I had never known before. But peace doesn't last forever. Because exactly 1 year later, she found me. And when she did, she fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Lowell, please. I need to talk to you. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the woman who had broken me, wondering if I had the strength to hear whatever excuse she was about to give. And then, she said something that changed everything. I didn't answer her right away. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the woman who had once been my entire world. Miriam. The woman who had shattered my trust, my sense of self, and the life I had built. She looked different, exhausted, thinner, as if the past year had weighed on her like 1,000 stones. Her once bright eyes were hollow, her hands trembling at her sides. She wasn't wearing makeup, which was rare for her. It was like she had unraveled in my absence. And yet, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even curiosity. Just a quiet, numbing emptiness. Please, Lowell, she pleaded, taking a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Just give me 5 minutes. A part of me wanted to turn around, walk back into my small apartment, and shut the door in her face. But another part, the one that had spent sleepless nights wondering why, the one that had replayed every moment leading up to my departure like a broken record, hesitated. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, as if afraid I'd change my mind and throw her back out. She looked around the tiny space. Nothing like the home we had shared together. Just a small living room with a worn-out couch, a cheap wooden table, and walls devoid of any personal touch. I had kept it that way on purpose. I wasn't here to build a new life. I was just existing. Miriam turned to face me, wringing her hands. I noticed the way her fingers fidgeted, a nervous habit she'd had since we first met. I've been looking for you for months, she started. I had no idea where you went, what happened to you. I thought you, she swallowed hard. I thought you might be dead. I didn't respond, because in a way, I had been. Why are you here, Miriam? My voice was cold, distant, a stranger's voice. She flinched but didn't look away. Because I need you to know the truth. I almost laughed at that. The truth? Now? After everything? I already know the truth, I said flatly. I read the messages. I saw the pictures. That was all I needed to know. She shook her head violently. No, you don't. You don't know everything. Please, just let me explain. I crossed my arms. I didn't want her explanations. I didn't want to hear whatever twisted version of reality she had crafted to justify her betrayal. But she wasn't leaving. And a part of me, maybe the part that still ached from what she did, wanted to know. Fine, I muttered, sitting down on the couch. You have 5 minutes. Miriam exhaled shakily, then sat across from me. I know what I did was unforgivable, she began. I don't expect you to forgive me. But you need to understand, it wasn't what you think. I clenched my jaw. Oh, you mean you didn't send those messages? You weren't meeting some guy behind my back. She hesitated. I was. But it wasn't about love, Lowell. It wasn't even about attraction. It was, she stopped, her voice breaking. I narrowed my eyes. Then what the hell was it about? She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. I was scared. That caught me off guard. Scared? Of what? She took a deep breath, then looked up at me, her eyes glistening. Of losing you. For a moment, I just stared at her. And then I let out a bitter laugh. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I know, she cried, gripping her hair. I know how it sounds, but please just listen. I didn't say anything, so she continued. I always felt like I wasn't enough for you. Like one day, you'd wake up and realize you deserve better. You were always so kind, so patient, so steady. And I was a mess. I kept waiting for you to get tired of me. I clenched my fists. So your solution was to sleep with someone else? She shut her eyes. I didn't sleep with him. That made me pause. Then what the hell did I see? Miriam wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. I met him. I kissed him. I let things go further than they should have. But I never crossed that line. And after that night, I regretted it. I cut it off immediately. But he kept threatening me. Said he'd tell you, that he'd make sure you left me. I panicked. I sent those messages to keep him quiet, to make him think I was still on the hook. But I swear, Lowell, I never wanted any of it. I stared at her, my mind racing. Could it be true? Did it even matter? Why now? I asked. Why did you come here after a year? She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. She placed it on the table between us. Because I'm pregnant, Lowell. My entire body went stiff. And I don't know if it's yours. The room fell into a suffocating silence. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stared at the envelope lying on the table between us. Did I hear her right? I forced myself to look at her, but my vision felt hazy, my thoughts tangled in a mess of disbelief and anger. Say that again. I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Miriam swallowed hard. I'm pregnant. And I don't know if it's yours. A cold chill ran down my spine. It was like the ground had disappeared beneath me, and I was free falling into something I couldn't control. I had spent an entire year convincing myself that I had left everything behind, that she was nothing more than a painful memory, a past life I had erased. And now, she had managed to drag me right back into the wreckage. So what do you expect me to do with that information? My voice came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't care. Miriam flinched. I don't know, she admitted, shaking her head. I don't know what I expected, but I couldn't jest. I couldn't keep this to myself. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. How far along are you? 7 months. My stomach twisted. I did the mental math. If the baby was mine, that meant you were already pregnant when I left. Miriam nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. I didn't know at the time. I found out a few weeks later, and by then, you were already gone. I tried looking for you, Lowell. I swear. But you disappeared. I shook my head. And now you want me to come back? Just like that? After everything? No, she cried. I needed you to know. My chest felt like it was caving in. A year of silence. A year of solitude, of trying to piece myself back together. And now she was here, dropping a bomb that had the power to undo everything. And what if it's not mine? I asked, my voice colder now. Miriam inhaled sharply, her hands tightening into fists in her lap. Then I'll take responsibility. I won't ask you for anything. But if it is yours, Lowell, I don't expect you to forgive me. But don't you want to know? I didn't answer. Because deep down, I already knew the truth. Of course, I wanted to know. I had spent months trying to erase her from my life. But if there was a child, my child, that changed everything. I let out a long breath and reached for the envelope, but I hesitated before picking it up. And if I open this and it is mine, then what? Miriam wiped at her eyes. Then, I don't know. But you deserve the choice, Lowell. Choice. That was rich, coming from her. She had taken my choice away the moment she betrayed me. She had shattered the life we built, ripped my trust apart, and left me wondering if anything had ever been real between us. And now, after a year of silence, she was giving me a choice? I clenched my jaw. Fine, I muttered. But you don't get to sit here and pretend that this wipes away what you did. She nodded quickly. I know. I grabbed the envelope, breaking the seal with steady hands. My heart pounded against my ribs as I pulled out the folded document inside. My eyes scanned the paper, the words blurring together for a moment. And then I saw it. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. My breath caught in my throat. My child. My child. I stared at the paper, rereading it over and over, as if the words would suddenly change, as if there had been some mistake. But there wasn't. The weight of the realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. Miriam watched me carefully, her hands clasped tightly together. Say something, please. I let out a shaky breath, setting the paper down. I need time. She nodded. I understand. No, you don't. My voice was sharp, my emotions unraveling. You don't get to walk in here and expect me to just accept this like it's nothing. Do you have any idea what this past year has been like for me? What you put me through? Miriam flinched as if I had struck her. I know I hurt you, Lowell, but I never stopped loving you. I let out a bitter laugh. You sure had a funny way of showing it. She bit her lip, silent. I stood up, suddenly feeling like the walls of my small apartment were closing in. I need air. Without waiting for her response, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, inhaling the crisp night air. The town was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows against the pavement. I closed my eyes, my head spinning. A year of running, of escaping. And now, in the span of a single conversation, my entire world had shifted again. I had a child I never knew existed, and now I had to decide what to do next. Because no matter how much I hated what Miriam had done, I couldn't walk away from my own flesh and blood. I stood outside for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty street, my breath fogging in the cold night air. My fingers clenched around the edges of my jacket, my mind racing in circles. Miriam was inside, waiting. For what? For me to say I'd forgive her? That I'd come running back now that I knew the truth? She had no idea what it had taken for me to claw my way out of the hell she had thrown me into. The nights I spent awake, staring at motel ceilings, my thoughts drowning me in what-ifs. The countless times I almost reached for my phone, desperate for an answer that would never come. I had built an entirely new life, even if it was small and empty. And now, with one conversation, she had ripped open wounds that had barely begun to heal. But then there was the other side of it. The child. My child. That fact had settled deep in my chest, a weight I couldn't shake. It didn't matter how much I hated what she did, how much I wanted to erase her from my life. There was a baby, a living, breathing part of me, and I couldn't ignore that. I turned back toward the apartment, pushing the door open. Miriam was still sitting in the same spot, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up quickly, eyes filled with something between hope and fear. Are you okay? She asked softly. I let out a dry laugh. No, but let's talk. She exhaled in relief and nodded. I pulled out a chair across from her, rubbing a hand over my face. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. I want to know exactly what happened before I left. Miriam shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. All right, she said, voice tight. You know that I betrayed your trust. You saw the messages. You saw the picture. I won't sit here and tell you that it wasn't real. It was. I made the choice to betray you, and there's no excuse for that. I clenched my jaw. I wasn't here for apologies. I was here for answers. Why? I asked. She swallowed. I told you before, I was scared. Not of you, but of losing you. I never felt like I was enough for you, Lowell. You were always so stable, so certain, and I felt like I was constantly failing at being the wife you deserved. And then there was him. I tensed. Who was he? Miriam looked down at her hands. His name was Malcolm. He was an old friend from college. We reconnected through social media. At first, it was just small talk, catching up, reminiscing about the past. But then it turned into something more. I clenched my fists beneath the table. I didn't want to hear his name, didn't want to picture the two of them together. Did you love him? She shook her head quickly. No, not even close. He was a distraction, a mistake. I never had feelings for him, but he made me feel like I wasn't failing, like I was still wanted. I scoffed. And I didn't make you feel wanted? Her face crumpled. You did, but I didn't see it. I was too wrapped up in my own insecurities. And by the time I realized what I was doing, it was too late. You were already gone. I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my jaw. And the baby? She hesitated, then placed a hand over her stomach. When you left, I was devastated. I thought I had ruined everything forever. I tried reaching out to you, but you had disappeared without a trace. Then, a few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Her voice broke slightly at the last word. I wanted to tell you, Lowell. I swear I did. But I didn't know where you were. And as time went on, I didn't know if you'd even want to know. I was terrified that I had lost you forever. I let her words sink in, the anger twisting inside me into something else, something heavier. So why now? I asked. Because the baby is almost here. And no matter what happened between us, I knew I had to find you. You deserve the choice. There was that word again. Choice. I sat there, staring at the woman I had once loved more than anything in the world. A woman who had ripped my heart out, but who was also carrying my child. What do you want from me, Miriam? Her eyes filled with tears. I just want you to be in our child's life. No matter what happens between us. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to come back. But I can't do this alone. I let out a slow breath, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Could I do this? Could I put everything aside and be a father, even if I could never trust her again? I didn't know. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to run away this time. All right, I said finally. I'll be there for the baby. But you and I? We're done. Miriam nodded quickly, wiping at her face. I understand. I wasn't sure she did, because even though I had agreed to be part of my child's life, I wasn't sure I could ever look at her the same way again. And something told me that this was just the beginning. I thought agreeing to be in my child's life would bring me some kind of clarity, that once the decision was made, things would settle into place. I was wrong. The weight of my choice followed me long after Miriam left my apartment that night. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I had just reopened a wound I had barely managed to close. The next morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, looking at a man I barely recognized. The same tired eyes, the same unshaven jaw, but something inside me had shifted. I had spent the past year running, from my past, from my pain, from the betrayal that had turned my life upside down. But now, I was forced to face it again. And there was no running from this. Days passed, and Miriam kept her distance, letting me process everything in my own time. But the reality of the situation had settled in. I wasn't just a man who had been betrayed anymore. I was about to be a father. And that meant I had responsibilities, ones I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I wanted to erase Miriam from my life. So, after a few days of struggling with the idea, I texted her. Me, doctor's appointment. I want to be there. She responded almost instantly. Miriam, tomorrow at 3. Thank you, Lowell. It means everything. I ignored the last part. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for my child. The next afternoon, I found myself standing outside a clinic I had never been to before, my hands shoved in my pockets, my heart pounding for reasons I didn't understand. Miriam was already there, sitting in the waiting area, her hands protectively cradling her stomach. She looked up when she saw me, a small, hesitant smile playing on her lips. You came. I nodded. I said I would. She shifted nervously. I wasn't sure. Neither was I. A nurse called her name, and we walked in together. The air between us was thick with tension, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about her. It wasn't about me. It was about the tiny life that was about to change everything. The ultrasound room was dimly lit, the hum of the machine filling the silence as the doctor prepared the screen. Miriam lay back, pulling her shirt up slightly, exposing the curve of her stomach. I forced myself to look, feeling a strange disconnect. The doctor pressed the probe against her skin, and suddenly, the room was filled with the sound of rapid, rhythmic thumping. A heartbeat. My child's heartbeat. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I exhaled sharply, my chest tightening in a way I hadn't expected. The screen flickered, and there it was, a tiny, moving figure, curled up inside her. "Everything looks perfect," the doctor said, adjusting the image. "Strong heartbeat, healthy growth. You're in the final stretch now." I barely heard her. I was too busy staring at the screen. That was my baby. Not an abstract idea. Not a distant possibility. A real, living, breathing life. And for the first time since Miriam had walked back into my life, something inside me softened. This wasn't about my pain anymore. This was about them. After the appointment, Miriam and I sat in my car, silent for a long time. "Did you feel anything?" she asked hesitantly. I looked at her, really looked at her. I had spent a year despising her, blaming her for everything I had lost. And now, sitting here, I realized something. I still hated what she had done, but I didn't hate her. I didn't love her anymore, either. I wasn't sure what I felt. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know I'm going to be there for them. No matter what." She nodded, her expression unreadable. That's all I could ever ask for. But I could tell. She was still holding on to something. Some hope that maybe, just maybe, this could bring us back together. And I knew I had to make something very, very clear. A week later, I knocked on Miriam's door. She opened it quickly, surprised to see me. "Lowell." I exhaled, rubbing the back of my neck. "We need to talk." She stepped aside, letting me in. The apartment was exactly as I remembered it, familiar, but no longer home. I sat down, and she followed, her hands resting on her belly. "I've been thinking a lot." I started, keeping my tone measured. "About everything. And I need to be honest with you." Her face paled slightly. "I don't hate you, Miriam. I'm angry at what you did. I'm hurt. But I don't want to spend my life resenting you." She swallowed hard. "I understand." I met her gaze. "But I need you to understand something, too. We're not getting back together. Ever." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded. "I know." "Do you?" I pressed. "Because I can't do this if you think there's a chance. There isn't. I'll be there for our child, but you and we're done." She wiped her eyes. "I do understand, Lowell. I wish I could take it all back." "So do I admitted. "But we can't." Silence stretched between us. And for the first time since she had re-entered my life, I felt lighter. The past still haunted me. The scars still ached. But I wasn't running anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to move forward. Something changed after that conversation. Miriam and I had finally drawn the line that had been looming between us since the moment she showed up at my door. There was no pretending, no hoping, no delusions. We weren't going to be a couple again. And that meant we had to figure out what came next. Because whether I liked it or not, we were about to be parents. Over the next few weeks, I forced myself to shift my focus. I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about the baby. I started asking more questions. What did they need? What did I need to prepare for? Miriam was still working, but her due date was approaching fast. She was hesitant at first, unsure if I was really committed, but the more I showed up, the more she softened. I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for them. I even started going with her to parenting classes. Let me tell you, there's nothing more humbling than sitting in a circle of expecting mothers, being the only dad in the room, and learning how to swaddle a fake baby while an instructor side-eyes you like you're going to drop it. Still, I did it. Because no matter how much pain Miriam had caused me, I refused to be the kind of man who abandoned his child. One afternoon, we met at a baby store. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the moment we walked in, I was overwhelmed. Cribs, strollers, bottles, diapers, a million different brands, colors, and designs. "I have a list," Miriam said, pulling out her phone. I nodded. "Good. Because I don't even know where to start." We walked through the aisles together, stopping every few minutes while she debated things like whether organic cotton onesies were worth the extra $5 or if the baby really needed a noise machine that played ocean sounds. I just followed along, nodding and pushing the cart, feeling strangely out of place in this world of baby products and expectant mothers. Until we reached the stroller section. She pointed at a sleek, expensive-looking one. I was thinking about this one, but it's kind of pricey. I glanced at the tag. $1,200 for a stroller? I scoffed. Does it drive itself? She sighed. It's supposed to be one of the best ones. I shook my head and pointed at a sturdy-looking but much cheaper one. This one looks fine. It's ugly, she muttered. It's a stroller, Miriam, not a fashion statement. She shot me a glare, but didn't argue. After an hour of way too many debates over things I never thought I'd care about, we left with more baby supplies than I knew what to do with. And for the first time in a long time, things almost felt normal. Not between us, but between two people who were trying their best to do right by the child they had created. A few nights later, Miriam called me. Hey, can you come over? Her voice sounded different. Stressed. Is everything okay? Yeah, it's just, she hesitated. I think I'm in labor. My stomach dropped. I'm on my way. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. This was it. I was about to become a father. By the time I got to her place, she was pacing near the door, holding her belly, breathing heavily. Hospital? I asked, grabbing her back. She nodded, wincing. Now. We sped to the hospital, and everything became a blur. Nurses. Paperwork. Machines beeping. Miriam gripping my hand so hard I thought she might break it. And then, crying. A baby's first cry. A sound so raw, so earth-shattering, that it broke something open inside me. I stood there, frozen, watching as the nurse wrapped up this tiny, squirming, red-faced human and placed them in Miriam's arms. It's a girl, the doctor announced. A girl. I had a daughter. And suddenly, nothing else mattered. Not the past. Not the pain. Only her. Miriam looked up at me, exhausted, but something in her eyes softened. Do you want to hold her? My breath caught. I hesitated, then slowly reached out. The nurse placed her in my arms, and in that moment, everything changed. She was so small, so fragile. Her tiny fingers curled against my shirt, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Purpose. Hours later, after everything had settled, I sat beside Miriam's hospital bed, watching our daughter sleep. She needs a name, Miriam murmured. I nodded. Did you have any in mind? She hesitated. I thought, maybe we could pick one together. I glanced at the baby, my heart aching in a way I didn't expect. Then I said the first name that came to mind. Elodie. Miriam blinked. Elodie, she repeated softly, then smiled. I love it. And just like that, our daughter had a name. I looked down at Elodie, my chest tightening. I had spent a year running from my past. But now, I had something worth staying for. And no matter how complicated things were between Miriam and me, I wasn't going to run anymore. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft breathing of Elodie, wrapped snugly in her hospital blanket. I sat in the chair beside Miriam's bed, my daughter asleep in my arms, feeling something unfamiliar yet undeniable. This was real. I was a father. Everything I had spent the past year believing, every reason I had convinced myself to stay away, every argument I had against coming back, meant nothing in this moment. Because she was here. Elodie. Tiny. Fragile. Innocent. She had no part in the mistakes her mother and I had made. No say in the choices that had destroyed our marriage. And now, she was the only thing that mattered. Miriam shifted in her hospital bed, exhausted but watching me carefully. You're good with her, she murmured. I scoffed softly. I have no idea what I'm doing. She smiled, barely. Neither do I. Silence stretched between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, not like before. Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, we weren't two broken people trying to figure out what went wrong. We were just two parents, sitting together, looking at the life we had created. But that didn't change the truth. We weren't fixing us. This wasn't the beginning of some reconciliation, some slow-burn love story where betrayal was forgiven and love was rekindled. That wasn't happening. Miriam knew it. I knew it. Have you thought about how we're going to do this? I asked. Her fingers tightened around the hospital blanket. I know I'm keeping her. That much is certain. I know. She hesitated. But I also know you don't want to be near me. I exhaled, looking at her carefully. It's not that simple. It is. She swallowed. Lowell, I don't want to make this harder for you. If you want to be in her life, you can be. If you don't, I won't force you. I stared at her, unsure if she was testing me. I'm not leaving her, Miriam. Ever. My voice was firm. You'll never have to wonder about that. She nodded, but I saw the guilt flash across her face. I don't deserve that, she whispered. No, I agreed. You don't. More silence. What about custody? I asked. She shifted, biting her lip. I don't want to fight you. I don't want to make things messy. Neither do I. I thought about it for a moment, then let out a slow breath. We figure it out as we go. We make it work. We set boundaries. And we put Elodie first. Always. She blinked at me, as if she hadn't expected that answer. Then she nodded. Okay. That was it. No drawn-out arguments. No bitter legal battles. Just two people who had already done enough damage trying to not do any more. It wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't leaving this time. The first night alone. A few days later, I found myself in my apartment, standing in front of a crib I had put together that morning, staring at the sleeping baby inside it. I had never been more terrified in my life. Elodie had only been home for a few hours, and already, the weight of fatherhood was crushing me. The hospital had been a safe space. There were nurses, doctors, people who knew what they were doing. But now it was just me. And her. She stirred, letting out a tiny noise, and I panicked. Was she okay? Was she breathing? I leaned over the crib, barely blinking. Yeah, breathing. I exhaled, rubbing a hand down my face. This was going to be the hardest thing I had ever done. But for some reason, as I watched my daughter sleep peacefully, I realized something. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't thinking about Miriam. I wasn't thinking about what she had done, about the messages I had read, about the life I had walked away from. I was thinking about this moment, about the future, because for once, I had something that was mine, something worth fighting for, something that had nothing to do with pain. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And somehow I adjusted. Fatherhood wasn't easy, not by a long shot. The sleepless nights, the crying, the endless diaper changes, the constant fear that I was messing it up, that I wasn't enough. But then, there were the moments that made it all worth it. Like the first time Elodie grabbed my finger with her tiny hands, or the way she would settle instantly when I held her against my chest. The quiet mornings when I'd wake up to find her staring up at me with those wide, curious eyes. She didn't care about my past. She didn't care that I had been broken, that I had spent a year running from something I didn't know how to face. All she knew was that I was her dad, and that was enough. Co-parenting with a ghost. Miriam and I talked, but only about Elodie. We kept it civil. No rehashing the past. No unnecessary interactions. She had her time with Elodie, and I had mine. We communicated through text most of the time, updates, pictures, scheduling. And it worked. At first, I thought it would be harder. That seeing her again, interacting with her, would bring everything back. But it didn't. Because, over time, she became nothing more than a co-parent. A presence in my life that I tolerated for the sake of my daughter. She never pushed for more. Never tried to fix what couldn't be fixed. Maybe she had finally accepted that I was never coming back. Or maybe she had just given up trying. Either way, I didn't care. My focus was on Elodie. On building something new. Something that wasn't tainted by the past. The unexpected conversation. One evening, after I had dropped Elodie off at Miriam's, I found myself standing outside her apartment longer than usual. She noticed. Something wrong? She asked, shifting Elodie in her arms. I hesitated. No, I said, then paused. Actually, yeah. She frowned. What is it? I sighed, rubbing a hand down my face. I never thought my life would look like this. That I'd be co-parenting with my ex-wife instead of raising my child under the same roof. That I'd still be figuring out how to live with what happened. Miriam's expression softened. I didn't think my life would look like this either, Lowell. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then she spoke again, her voice quiet. Do you regret it? I frowned. Regret what? She swallowed. Everything. Us. Elodie. Leaving. I exhaled slowly. I don't regret Elodie, I said without hesitation. Not for a second. She nodded, looking down at our daughter, her lips pressing together. And the rest? I thought about it for a long time. Did I regret her? The years we spent together? The love we once had? No. Because even though it had ended in betrayal, even though she had shattered me in ways I never thought possible, she had also given me the most important thing in my life. I regret how it ended, I admit it. I regret what you did. But I don't regret that we met. That we built something, even if it didn't last. She looked up at me, something unreadable in her eyes. I regret what I did too. I know. She let out a shaky breath. But you'll never forgive me, will you? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know if I would ever fully forgive her. I don't think forgiveness is what matters anymore, I said finally. What matters is that we don't make our daughter pay for our mistakes. Miriam nodded. And that was it. No long-winded apologies. No desperate attempts at closure. Just an understanding that some things couldn't be fixed. And maybe that was okay. Moving on. Months passed. Seasons changed. And one day, I woke up and realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't waiting for the pain to disappear. I wasn't waiting for Miriam to fix something that had already crumbled. I wasn't waiting for closure. I had already moved on. Not in the sense that I had someone new, but in the sense that she didn't matter anymore. She was just a person I shared a child with. Nothing more. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was truly, completely free. Final thoughts. If you had told me a year ago that I would be sitting here, writing this with my daughter asleep in the next room, I wouldn't have believed you. Because I thought my life had ended the night I walked away from Miriam. But it hadn't. It had only just begun. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever love again, if I'll ever trust someone the way I trusted her. But I do know this. I survived. And for now, that's enough.